Good evening. My name is BIkunika. Today I'll be discussing select chapters from Zora Neale Hurston's The Barracoon, The Last Slave Cargo. Zora Neale Hurston's background in anthropology influences the way she formulates the questions, documents the story, and delivers Kojo's narratives. Hurston, the phenomenal author, is tasked with writing and preserving the life of the last living slave, Kojo Colosso Lewis. Hurston's keen interest in African American and Caribbean folklore has led her to receive her bachelor's in anthropology. This has been Hurston's drive to pursue Kojo's life. Kojo's life is altered the moment the neighboring Dahomey Empire rages war on his town. During this time, a group of African slave owners traveled to Dahomey, present-day Benin, smuggling 125 slaves. Early chapters highlight how European nations instigate conflict between African nations to keep their slave population abundant. Kojo then narrates the story of his life, starting from his grandfather down to his life in America to the present day. Kojo narrates his life in the form of proverbs, stories, and parables. The idea of returning to Yoruba land, which is present-day Nigeria, and the thoughts of his life before the Middle Passage flow throughout his narration. Kojo's childhood is important to understanding the cultural relativity of this literature. He recalls various activities in his hometown, such as seeing his grandfather, who was an official of the king, other court officials carrying out their duties, the process and tradition of marriage, and the society rule and laws. One idea that Kojo amplifies is his desire to return home. When Hurston says, Kojo, I want to hear about you and how you lived in Africa, Kojo replies, in the Africa soil, I can't tell you about the son before I tell you about the father. This is essential to the narration. In essence, his father's story influenced his story. The history of his grandfather reveals the societal structure of his origins. One day in the market, Kojo sees a young lady with beautiful arm bangles. Soon after, he begins the initiation process for marriage. He never completes the process due to enslavement. This resonates in his statement, I only a boy 19 years old. I have one initiation. A boy must go through many initiations before he become a man. This reveals his distress towards the events that have occurred. This reveals the distress towards events that will occur, even though many years have passed. Kojo's ability to narrate traditional events and customs add to the delivery of his story. The recollection shows his society of origin, a society that law and order traditions and a rich culture history. America serves as a metaphoric barracoon for Kojo because he is unable to return home. He is confined in an unfamiliar land. After 5 years of forced enslavement in Georgia, he still desires to go home. Chapter 8 begins after emancipation. After emancipation, Kojo, among other slaves imported from the Catilda, agreed to save money to return to Africa. This enduring sense of closure persists throughout his narrative. Soon they establish Africatown, which allows them to participate in their native traditions and religions, without being criticized by African American bred slaves. Together, they appoint elected officials, enact laws, form a school, and a church. America represents a barracoon. Kojo's story is symbolic yet optimistic. Although he endures a traumatic life, he is kidnapped from his home, experiences the death of his wife and children, and can never return to Nigeria. During Hurston's interview, Kojo states, my boys is my feet. My daughter is my hands. My wife, she my eyes. She left, Kojo finished. Even with the death of his family, he remains hopeful throughout his life, which is evident in the last chapter titled Alone. Barracoon ends with Kojo's parable about him and his deceased wife departing at a different bus stop. Death is interpreted as a bus stop. Everyone must reach their bus stop in life. Barracoon structure is essential to the academic learning experience because it relies on a first-hand account. This biographical style is particularly useful in showcasing Kojo's experience and life in Yoruba society. Surviving the Middle Passage, forced enslavement, and living as an emancipated black man in the South, Kojo not only survived slavery, but the Civil War, Emancipation, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the Great Depression. His timeline articulates experiences of many slaves that came before him. His insight gives unique insight into the creation of African American South. Dr. Hurston opposed editorial suggestions that advised her to manipulate his spoken quotes. His dialect displays the language of first-generation enslaved Africans in America. Kojo's dialect in this biography serves the purpose of showcasing early linguistic history of the pre-emancipated South. Dr. Hurston's decision to maintain Kojo's dialect allows for the preservation of his words and highlights the importance and cultural significance that language carries. Resilience is a common theme. Kojo's inability to return to Nigeria drives him to establish Africatown. Kojo's recollection is vital to American history because it shows that black history does not begin with slavery. It reveals the complexity in society's structures, traditions, and rules of the land. Kojo's experience sheds light on the history of Africans and their descendants in the American South. Thank you. This is the analysis of Zora Hurston's Barracoon, The Last Slave Cargo.